Right, so hopefully you can see my screen.
Yes, I can see that.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Thanks very much for the previous speakers, and thanks very much, Rizwan, for the introduction and for also hosting this event. So, as Rizwan said, so I've been involved in a number of initiatives, and the Medina Town Movement is the present name and the flavor of the day. There's been a number of events that have led up to this, and the principles that we founded the Medina Town Movement, as Allah Ta'ala mentions in the Quran several times about these 5 principles which we try and uphold, of justice, of peace, compassion, freedom, and unity. And in the center here, you can see there's a crest which represents the movement, and you'll see these symbols can be found within the crest itself. So the balance of justice, the tree of compassion, the dove representing peace, the mountain of freedom, and the rope of unity. So that's so some of these ayats that Allah mentions throughout the Quran, they're emphasizing justice, peace, compassion, freedom, and unity. And as I said, that's what we try and uphold our values to. And as the previous speakers mentioned, Dawud has mentioned about Mizan. I'm glad that he mentioned that word balance on a couple of occasions in his talk, because this is something that we're seriously out of focus on, and this is what is at the heart of the matter, where Allah mentions over 20 times in the Quran, and we're completely out of kilter with our social economic balance, the economical balance. On the other hand, we have the environmental balance, which is an outer environment as well as an inner environment. So when we look at the inner environment, we're looking to address our own personal health and our connection with the outer environment, which is the wider environment, which is what people would say as the trees, the mountains, the rivers, and everything else which we feel connected with as an outer environment. But what's really missing here is the balance, which is completely out of kilter, and that needs to be restored. And there's 3 main areas where, as a Medina Town movement, is trying to address within this balance, to try and restore the balance, and that is environment, health, and the third being business. So as the previous 2 speakers have alluded toward and mentioned about environment and the politics and economics and how it's all interconnected, this is where the Medina Town movement is trying to bring some of those actions of how we can actually make a change locally and nationally, and start connecting the dots and really start making a change and seeing a difference. So what we've done is we've produced a set of infographics to use as education, because what it needs to do is there needs to be a knowledge base, and we need to share how we can firstly educate ourselves in the correct way, which is the middle way in the balance, and as Muslims show that through the prophetic example of the Messenger of Allah, Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. So we used and we've created these useful infographics which can be downloaded from our website, which is www.medinatownmovement.co.uk. And the second stage after education is implementation. And of course, we need to do that in our own personal space and then the wider community. So as we've been talking about planting trees and planting, just using plants in general, plant a tree in your garden, have plants in the general home, and then start looking after the environment. And Rizwan's going to be speaking about how we can restore gardens in the next talk. So that's also very key of how we can start to practically do things. So these infographics are taken from Fazl Khalid's book, From the Signs of the Earth, and we've tried to interpret them in visual images and easy to understand and easy to digest, small snippets, where Dawud has mentioned about the 4 principles of the fiqh of the environment. There's the Hima system, the Harim system, the Awqaf system, and the Hisba system. And he mentioned about the 4 principles. And then, of course, there's very sort of useful bits of information, which hopefully you can find within these infographics of what you can do about being conservative with water, electricity, and planting trees, and being more attentive towards food. So Sunnah Health is what we term the next section of our key piece of information which we try to address. And again, the interconnection between our health and the wider environment, this cannot be overemphasized as a completely interrelated, and we cannot survive without having a healthy ecosystem. Therefore, recognizing where we are with our place in the environment and addressing this balance is fundamental for our own health. So again, as the previous example, with what we've done here is we've created these 5 infographics to help understand our relationship and how to restore good health by following examples of the Messenger of Allah, peace and blessings be upon him. So these infographics, there's various things that we talk about, and we mention here about eating less meat, for example, getting proper rest, surrounding yourself with nature, slowing down and exercising, spreading kindness, inviting people to your homes. Of course, that's not something that we can do at the moment with the social distancing, but it's something that we should be we should be used to doing all of these activities. So that's something that we need to try and think about addressing. So these are elements that we've incorporated. And the third is the Sunnah business, which is as we call muamalat, or dealings or transaction. And often people who have come from an Indo-subcontinent background, we often talk about muamalat as dealings rather than transaction. But in the Islamic world, the people who understand fiqh and jurisprudence tend to look at muamalat more as transactions in business terms or in other matters. But what we tend to forget is the things that are much closer to us in terms of the muamalat. And some of that is simply checking up on your neighbor. How are they, and checking upon just basic needs. So that is all muamalat. But in this context we're addressing here, we're looking at it from a Sunnah business. So some of the things that we talk about here and we look at to address within the Medina Town movement is looking at currency which is not possible to manipulate. So can we actually use something else as a currency? Markets which are free for traders and regulated, contracts which are just and legal, and including guilds. Again, that's something that's completely forgotten about. These are terms that used to and do exist to some extent, but very minimally in this country and across the world. Distribution networks which are completely monopolized. Caravanserais for traders to rest free of charge. And
5 minutes, Adnan.
Even in this country, thanks, we've had inns where we've tried to we've accommodated people who are traveling and the trading. But the key point here is removal of unjust taxes. And just on that, I mean, I just want to mention just a few points here. This chart that I'm displaying here shows you something about currency, because one of the things is that gold seems to be at the heart of a just system, because it's been used for centuries without fault. But what this graph shows you here is purchasing power. And it shows you the purchasing power of gold against a basket of commodities from 1560. This man, Roy Jastram, who wrote this book, The Golden Constant, he wrote this book and he depicted this graph from 1560 all the way to 1997. And for the first 400 years, he looks at the index, and you can see very minor fluctuations of the gold required for the same number of items. Compared to paper currency from the year 1800. So if you look at the marker just where the straight line is entered, you can see that there's more fluctuation as soon as paper currency has been entered into the system. And then what happens over here is, if you look at the timeline here at the bottom, this is where the great crash took place in 29, and the pound and the dollar completely fell off the chart, which has no purchasing power whatsoever. So gold is an example of stable and just currency, as it is a currency itself, which by definition of what money should be storable, it should not be perishable, and it must have intrinsic value, and above all, it must be chosen freely. So those are some of the things that are imperative in restoring balance in business matters, where we're finding ourselves with lots of unemployment in a situation which the economy is potentially in tatters. So practical examples of what you can do. I've listed a number of things here, and because I'm running out of time, I'll just whiz through some of these. So from a Sunnah environmental actions, what we should be looking at is eliminating plastic from homes, creating green spaces, becoming conservative energy use, walking where possible, recycling. Sunnah health actions, start eating more vegetables and reduce meat, and consequently that even strengthens your immune system. With COVID-19, they've often been saying that people have not really been addressing the fact that you should be increasing your health and immune system. That's what you need to improve on. Eat local foods rather than imported foods. Eat seasonal rather than out of season goods. Exercise at least 3 times a week. Inviting people to your house, as we said. And in Sunnah business, be honest in your transactions. If you're an employer, then you have great responsibility that you must be just towards your employees. Buying gold and silver, use them as a means of exchange to protect your wealth from depreciating. We can create trade networks to circulate money and begin a local economy and really understand the economics of our time and try and study that. So just as an off note, a very interesting book that you might want to look into is a book called Life After the State, and that's written by a man called Dominic Frisby. And it's interesting that Dowd also mentioned off the grid and after the state some of the things that he mentioned. And if you read the final chapter that he mentions, he says there's 34 things to look out for life after the state, and I'll just read some of them to you. And it's quite ironic because we're actually finding ourselves in a situation where, in this lockdown situation, we're actually in a situation where we're in between not being in the state and being in the state, and that's demonstrated by some of the things that he mentions. And he says you're responsible for the education of your children. You decide what you want them to learn, and of course you would do that. And people are homeschooling. There's more trade and exchange. People will at some point be forced to start trading amongst themselves, and I know that from local communities there's lots of groups who are now starting to trade amongst themselves anyway. He says wealth and power are not concentrated in the hands of a few, but that spread will all be richer. There's less paperwork, there's less bureaucracy, there's no trade restrictions, barriers will be lifted, greater prosperity. Not only are we all richer, but everything is cheaper. So, you know, those are all some of the examples, and he goes on and on. And so these are all the points that, you know, we can take and benefit from. But there's 2 key words that I want to leave the listeners with, and that is balance and justice. And that's all I have to say. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Adnan. There's lots of food for thought there, covered quite a bit there, and you've already got a question which we can move straight on to, which is, would Medina Town Movement consider producing dinar dirhams for Muslims looking to convert currency to real money? Okay, yeah, so we already did, so thanks very much for that question. So several years ago, we did produce our own silver dirham, which I'm holding up at the moment, and I'm not sure if I can show that and share that. I think if you unshare your screen. Yeah, okay, your screen. Yeah, so if you can see, so this is a silver coin that we minted several years ago. I'm holding it up in the camera. I'm not sure how visible that is. We can see that. Yeah. Right. So there's inscripted on this coin, which is a silver coin, which is just under 3 grams of pure silver. And it states on it, let the marketplace be free of unjust taxes. So this is something that we minted several years ago, but there's obviously there's barriers to entry, and one of the greatest barriers, in fact, is ourselves. And we have to want and understand for the need to do this if we want to trade in dirham, silver, or anything else for that matter. As I said, you know, one of the conditions of a currency is it's chosen freely amongst people, and it's not imposed upon us, and the currency that we use is imposed, and this is why we're in the state that we're in. Is there another question? That's it, I think. So thank